I'm a 34-year-old female, and this took place in 2007. I was around 18 at the time, and in college. I had just graduated, and my apartment lease wasn't up yet, so I decided to stay until it was, which was a horrible decision. To understand the story, I need to tell you about the apartment layout. When you walk through the front door, there's a flight of stairs leading to the actual main floor of my apartment, and once you go up those stairs, you have a full view of my living room and the balcony door. And if you were to go out of the balcony door, there's a wooden divider on the left-hand side that separates my balcony from my neighbors. My neighbors were an old couple that had been there longer than I had. I never really interacted with them, so I had no clue what was to come. It started on the night that I had just bought my new car. I was standing outside on my balcony reading the owner's manual while on the phone with my mom, and it was snowing slightly. I suddenly felt a warm breeze of air and a wicked smell of whiskey. I turned my head only to be face to face with a man leaning over the wooden divider that separates me from my neighbors. I practically jumped out of my skin and hung up on my mom without saying anything. "Hey, I'm Jake." The man was holding out his hand to mine. "Hi," I said. "So what are you doing out here in the cold?" He replied. "Oh, just reading a book," I said with a forced smile. Then as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. I immediately grabbed my phone and book and went inside. That was that for the night. Then the next day, I was getting ready for work and then went outside to get the mail. When I did, I saw a note sticking out of my mailbox. I pulled it out, and it said something along the lines of, "You are very beautiful. Can I take you out on a date?" And his name signed at the bottom of the letter. I walked inside and put the letter on my counter, feeling very confused. Then I left for work later that night. I was in my room reading a book until I heard screaming coming from my neighbor's apartment. They were all yelling at each other, and then I heard Jake say to his mom that he would slit her throat. A chill went down my spine as I heard this. Then I heard my neighbor's sliding glass door slam shut and footsteps on their balcony. Mind you, my bedroom wall is right next to their balcony, and I can hear everything. Then I could smell the smell of cigarettes and whiskey again. I somehow fell asleep eventually, but then woke up to use the bathroom. I sat up and began to walk out of my bedroom door after you. Do you have to walk past the sliding glass door, and then the bathroom is right across from the door. So anyways, as I'm walking towards the bathroom, he yells at me, "Get back in bed, Birdie." When he called me Birdie, it made me want to leave the apartment and never come back. I rushed into the bathroom, then a few minutes later came back out and practically ran to my bed. I was only 18 and wasn't the smartest when it came to choices like this. So I ended up going to sleep, then woke up early the next day and felt a cold breeze. I immediately shot up and my eyes darted around the room looking for the source. I didn't find anything. So I walked out into my kitchen living room and saw it. The balcony door was wide open, and there was a note on my kitchen counter. I shut the door and saw that the lock was missing from the door handle. But that was the least of my worries because my apartment had just been broken into. I picked up the note with shaky hands and read it. It was a whole paragraph about how I should go on a date with him. And at the bottom of the paper it said, "P.S. I promise you won't regret it the rest of the day. I was paranoid that he would come back and do something later. That night I was once again on the phone with my mom, and then I suddenly heard running and pounding on my walls. That creep was running down the hallway and pounding on my walls and doors. I told my mom that on the phone, and she told me not to answer it. Then I walked towards my door and just stood there. As he pounded and yelled from the other side, a few minutes went by and then it stopped. I told my mom I had to go, then I walked back to my living room and froze at what I saw there. He was standing in the middle of the room, staring at me. "Why didn't you answer the door?" he said in a cold tone. "I was in the shower," I said back clearly, lying. "Okay, then he climbed around the divider and left, and I never saw him again. A week later, my lease was up for my apartment, and I talked to my landlord. He told me that the man, Jake, had no permission to be on the property since the limit of people in one apartment was 2, and my neighbor had 3. So after I moved all my stuff, about a month went by without any problems. Then my landlord randomly called me and told me how a young couple moved into my old apartment and the man had broken in several times and even smashed their windows. Goes to show how crazy and dangerous people can actually be. So random, man named Jake. Let's never meet. Since my name is Francisco, and I used to work at a sporting goods store when I was younger, this was back when I was like 19 or 20 and lived with my parents when I wasn't at college. I held the job at the sporting goods store since my senior year of high school, and I worked there for about 3 years, total during, I believe, my first summer break from college. There was a newer employee to the store. It was a girl named Emma. She was around my age and was short, had dark hair, and I didn't know anything about her other than that we didn't have a whole lot of employees at our store. There would maybe be about 5 to 7 of us working at once, usually 2 at the check lanes and the rest around different departments of the store. I'm not sure exactly when Emma got hired, but she worked there when I got back from college. We worked together a handful of times. I would work both as a cashier and in some other departments as well. A few times I spoke briefly with Emma, but not too much. She seemed cool for the most part, but not really the type of person that I would usually hang out with. I remember that one night, I guess, Emma and I both got off at the same time. I believe it was 9 p.m. I had been working near the golf department, and she was in another part of the store, as we were both clocking out. She asked me if I drove there, and I replied that I did. She then asked me if I could give her a ride home. I didn't mind too much, but asked first where she lived. It was a city that was not that far away from mine. It was maybe like 5 minutes out of the way, so not a huge deal. I said yes, and then we left the store together. We got into my car, and she gave me the address to her house, which I drove to. The place was an older-looking apartment complex where she said that she lived with her boyfriend. She was nice and told me thanks for giving her a ride, and then I left and went home. I didn't think much of the interaction now. I worked the next day, an earlier shift. My availability was pretty much all day on most days because it was summer and I didn't have school. Emma was not working on this day, though. I remember that it was like 12 o'clock in the afternoon or something. The store was not very busy, as it usually was quiet at this hour. I was working towards the back, stalking one of the shelves near the baseball equipment. I saw this guy enter the aisle and start aggressively walking over to me. He had dark short hair like a buzz cut, and the guy was not that tall, but somewhat strong-looking. He looked right at me and asked me who I thought I was. I told him I had no idea who he was or what he was talking about. The guy told me that he was Emma's boyfriend and accused me of, quote, trying to take his girl. I realized that there must have been some huge misunderstanding of what happened. Either that or this guy was an extremely jealous boyfriend who didn't trust Emma at all. I really didn't want to get in the middle of their problems. He was like right up in my face, asking if I thought I was a tough guy. I told him to calm down and said I didn't do anything with Emma. I told him she simply asked me for a ride home from work, so I gave her one, the boyfriend, then told me that his car was working fine, and she could have asked him. I told him I didn't know that, and further said that I didn't even know she had a boyfriend, until she told me the previous night he seemed to actually calm down a bit. I told him I could assure him that I was not trying to steal his girl, and he had nothing to worry about. He told me that he better not, quote, catch me tripping again, and then he walked away after the interaction. I was really surprised that he got so angry. I also started to wonder if Emma was stuck in a bad relationship or something. The next time I worked with her was a couple of days later when I saw her. I walked over and said hi. I told her about what her boyfriend did, and she said sorry, but he gets like that. Sometimes I asked her if everything was okay in their relationship. That's when she told me that she actually broke up with him the day before, which would have been the day after he confronted me. She also said that she moved back in with her parents. I told her sorry, and she said that she was fine and happy to be moving on. So after that, I went back to work and didn't see Emma for the rest of my shift that night. Emma got off at like 700, and I got off at 9 again after clocking out. I walked through the parking lot to my car when I got in my car and left. I was followed home by Emma's ex. I know this because the car was parked not that far away from me in the parking lot. I noticed it because the parking lot was almost empty, and after getting inside my car when I started to drive away, the other car left right after me, because of our two cars being basically the only ones around. I found this a little bit odd. Then when I left the car, made all of the first 3 or 4 turns that I did when we got to a stoplight. I looked back to see the man was driving. I didn't get an exact look at his face, with it being night, but he resembled Emma's boyfriend. I drove the rest of the way home until I got to my street. Then I wasn't really sure what to do. I went around the block twice with him, staying on my tail. Finally, I decided to just pull into my driveway, and I did so, and then got out of my car. He pulled into the driveway after me, but I sprinted out of my car really quickly and around the house into the backyard. I didn't look to see what the guy did. I knew that my parents usually kept the sliding glass door in our backyard unlocked, so I quickly got in the house that way. When I looked, the man didn't chase me. I shut the door and then locked it, and then I covered it with blinds. Then I went back around to the front window and looked out. When I did, I saw that the guy was getting back into his car, and he then drove away. I also confirmed that it was, in fact, Emma's ex-boyfriend. I thought about calling the police, but decided not to. I hoped that this guy would just realize there was no reason to go after me. I didn't work for a few days after that. I just happened to have some off days in a row, which was nice in this free time. One of the days I went to the mall with a few friends. There was a really large mall not far away from where I lived. We were doing some shopping for a number of things, and I was having a great time. until I noticed Emma's ex-boyfriend again. And I didn't think that this was just a coincidence. I didn't feel scared at all because I was with 3 of my friends when we were in the food court. The guy was sitting a ways away at a table by himself. He was sort of facing us, and I pointed him out to my friends and told them the story. They said we should go up to him. But I said no, I didn't want a big fight to break out or something, so we stayed there and then left. A while later, I saw him walking a ways behind us about 30 minutes after that at another location in the mall. It was really creepy. I was honestly so surprised that this guy was after me. Did he seriously think that I was responsible for his breakup? We left the mall later that day, and I didn't see the guy for the rest of it the next time I worked. Emma also happened to be there when I saw her. I walked up and asked her how she was doing. She told me that she was doing really good and was going to be moving to Seattle in 2 weeks. We lived in California, so that was a ways away. I told her, "That's great, but your ex-boyfriend is stalking me." She asked me why, and I said, probably because he thinks I'm responsible for them breaking up. She said that was crazy and that I had nothing to do with it. I told her to tell him that then, but she said she had him blocked on everything and wasn't going to contact him. I realized that this guy was probably just taking all of his anger out on me, or at least was trying to. I was seriously considering getting the police involved once more. Emma got off before me, and I got off work. Later that night, I walked out to my car and saw another one parked by me again. It was the same guy. This was getting me really angry, but this time when I got within maybe 10 feet of my car, Emma's ex got out of his. He then started walking over to me all aggressive. I asked him why he kept following me around, and he didn't say anything. He just kept walking towards me. Then he got right up in my face again and took a swing at me. I moved, but he still got me a little in the side of the head. I took a swing at him but missed. Then he got me good, I'm embarrassed to say, but I pretty much got the tar kicked out of me. In my opinion, it was clearly not his first fight for me. It was my first fight since probably the 2nd grade, so he hit me like 4 or 5 times, and I maybe got like 1 or 2 punches to him, which didn't seem to hurt him much. I fell to the ground, and after that he then walked off and went back into his car. I was just glad that he didn't kick me while I was down. Then he drove off. I gathered myself and then called the police and told them what happened. They came out to my location, and I ended up getting some medical aid on the scene. But overall, I was fine. I only had some bruises and scrapes, and luckily no concussion of anything. Finally, I was able to go home. The police said that they would look into the guy. Well, the next day I got word that he was arrested. Apparently, he already had a warrant for failure to appear on some other charge. I think it was theft, and he had a bit of a history of run-ins with the law. I also filed charges against him for assault. It was a huge relief that he was off the streets and would stop following me. I was really mad for a while about getting mixed up in that whole deal. Looking back, I'm just glad that I'm okay. My early days after graduating college, I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to rent an apartment with someone else who had never met before. He'd become my roommate, and his name was Randall. At first, he seemed easy enough to get along with. He didn't talk too much, but he had a heavy Spanish accent. The room I'd be getting was already furnished, and that was one of the appealing factors to this apartment. It had a twin-sized bed tucked in the corner, a nice-sized dresser, a closet, and a TV stand. In another corner of the room, there were a bunch of stuffed animals sitting on the dresser, though, which I found a bit odd. Most notably, a big teddy bear facing the bed, when I asked Randall about the stuffed animals. He gave a really loud laugh and said his room had the same thing he recommended I leave them be, as to show respect to the landlord. I didn't really talk to Randall much that first day. Other than that, I spent most of my time unpacking my clothes and supplies and setting up my TV when I was laying in the bed. Watching TV that night, I thought I heard something. It was a very brief noise, but it was definitely audible, and it sounded like some kind of small electronic component. I chalked it up to being a house noise, and continued my show the next day. Randall wasn't home all day. I didn't know if or where he worked, but I just assumed he was at work that night. When I was in my room watching TV, I heard the front door open and Randall walk through the hall to his room before shutting the door a little later. I was getting changed into my pajamas when I heard the same sound from the night before this time, without the TV noise in the background, so I heard him much clearer. It was definitely some kind of electronic device, but I didn't know what or where. It still didn't seem like a big deal. So I got into my bed and started reading my current book at the time, then went to sleep the next day, and I saw Randall when I came home after work, and he asked me what book I was reading. At first I didn't get the question, but then he said he was talking about the book that I was reading in my room. I looked at him in silence of confusion. I asked him how he knew I was reading a book, and he said in his heavy Spanish accent that he had to go into my room just to take something out that he left in there. And that's when he noticed the book. I asked him nicely not to go into my room anymore. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lock on the door, so I couldn't stop him when I wasn't home that night. When I grabbed my book from under my bed, I stopped and wondered how would he see my book if I had it under my bed. Thinking about this now creeped me out, and I was in no mood to read anymore. I looked around the room as I thought to myself. Then I noticed that big teddy bear on the dresser again. Now it was angled so perfectly to face me in the bed. Then I had a thought. Scary thought. I stood up and walked over to the bear, grabbed it and looked closely into its eyes. I felt my heart skip a beat when I realized there was a camera in one of the eye holes. I threw the thing into the corner of the room and went to Randall's door and tried opening it. His door apparently had a lock because it wouldn't open, but I knew he was in there. I pounded on the door, screaming his name, but he wouldn't answer. I saw the light sneaking in through the bottom of the door go dark, as I assumed he turned off the light. I went back to my room and called the landlord. I explained everything and told him I'm leaving right now, and I had a valid reason to void the contracts. I packed a little amount of things I brought into my car and left that same night, never looking back. The landlord surprisingly never even came to me to collect the money for those few days. I was there ever since that night. I have a phobia of stuffed bears. Like I always have to turn them away so that they're not facing me.